Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a really big idea about personal transformation. We often think of it as this long, hard-fought battle. But what if that's just completely wrong? We're going to break down a sermon that argues real change isn't a marathon at all. It's more like flipping a light switch.
All right, so let's just jump right in with the central question here. Is a profound spiritual transformation, a conversion, something that happens over many, many years of struggle? Or can it all happen in a single, defining moment?
So on one side, you've got this long, hard process of trying to become better, and on the other, an instantaneous, decisive event. Now, our guide for this whole explainer is a really fascinating sermon by Rev William Macleod. He dives deep into one of the most famous stories of personal struggle and basically argues that, we've been getting it wrong this whole time.
So, a lot of people believe that the ideal path to faith involves this lengthy period of inner turmoil, this wrestling with your own demons that can last for years. And they often point to one key figure as the ultimate proof.
That's right, Jacob. The traditional view is that God started working on Jacob at a place called Bethel, and that this whole process took 2 full decades to finally wrap up. It's the classic story of a long, drawn-out spiritual journey.
But here's where that whole long struggle idea kind of hits a snag. The sermon points out this huge inconsistency. If a 20-year struggle is the model, then why are conversions in the New Testament so incredibly fast? You think about Saul of Tarsus. His transformation literally took 3 days. This kind of contradiction makes you step back and ask a really important question. Are we even sure we're reading Jacob's story correctly to begin with?
To really get the sermon's argument, we've got to look at who Jacob was before this big encounter. And let's be honest, he was far from a role model.
Okay, to really appreciate the turnaround here, you have to remember where Jacob was at. His life was just this domino effect of terrible choices. First, he flat out lies to his own blind father Isaac. He uses that lie to steal the sacred birthright blessing that belonged to his brother Esau. Naturally, this makes Esau furious enough to vow to kill him. And what's the result of all this? Jacob ends up a fugitive, running for his life with nothing but the clothes on his back.
So, just try to picture the scene. He's at absolute rock bottom. He's an outcast, he's riddled with guilt, and he's sleeping on the hard ground, totally alone. In his own mind, he's not just far from his family, he believes he's left his God miles and miles behind. And it's right there, in that moment of total despair, that everything changes. And this brings us right to the heart of the sermon's argument, the encounter at Bethel. Now, the common view says this is where Jacob's 20-year struggle started, but this sermon says, nope, that's wrong. This wasn't the start of the fight, this was the transformation. While he's sleeping on that bed of rocks, he has this absolutely incredible dream about a ladder, a connection between heaven and earth. And it's in this dream that God speaks right to him, not with the judgment he probably expected, but with a promise that would change his life forever. This quote really gets to the core of the deal God makes with him. Notice the focus. It's a promise of constant presence and protection. And what's so wild is that it's completely unearned. It's totally unconditional. And the promises themselves are just staggering. Land, countless descendants, a blessing for the whole world through his family, and most importantly, God's unending presence. The sermon's point is, this isn't God saying, hey, I'll help you change. This is God declaring that right then and there, a completely new reality has begun for Jacob. So the sermon's whole position is that Jacob walked away from Bethel a totally converted man. It was done. But that raises a question, right? If this is conversion, then what about all that struggle and guilt people so often feel before they come to faith? Where does that fit in?
Okay, so to really get this instant conversion idea, we have to understand a really key distinction the sermon makes. This part is absolutely crucial to the whole argument because it draws a very bright line between 2 different experiences that people often mix up.
So first up, there's conviction. The sermon defines this as that feeling of guilt, the awareness of your own sin, and realizing that you need to be saved. Jacob definitely felt this on his bed of rocks. And it's a necessary step for sure, but, and this is the key, according to this view, it does not save you. To really drive this point home, the sermon uses a super powerful and honestly tragic example, Judas Iscariot. You see, he probably felt the deepest conviction imaginable, but, the argument goes, he was never actually converted. Judas felt an immense conviction. He was miserable. He was in total despair. He felt this crushing guilt for what he'd done. But according to this theology, he was still unconverted. All that conviction just led him to despair and death, not to new life.
Conversion, on the other hand, is presented as something totally different. It's like a resurrection. It's an instant event where a person is brought from a state of spiritual death to spiritual life. It's not a process of getting better, it's a complete change of state, from one to the other.
Now, this distinction between conviction and conversion leads us to the sermon's final and maybe its most challenging conclusion. Because according to this view, when it comes to a person's spiritual state, there is simply no gray area.
So the crucial point here is that there's no middle ground. A person exists in one of two distinct states. You're either unconverted, dead in sin, a child of wrath, or you're converted, alive to God, a child of God. It's one or the other.
The sermon argues that even though your feelings of conviction and your spiritual struggles can go on for years, you remain fully in that unconverted state, right up until that single, instantaneous moment of faith. You're either alive or you're not. There's just no in between.
So really, the big takeaway from this explainer is this massive shift in perspective. It reframes salvation away from being a long, human-centered struggle to try and earn God's favor, and puts the focus squarely on a sudden, God-centered event of grace that you simply receive.
And so the sermon ends by taking this whole theological breakdown and turning it into a single direct question for every person listening. By arguing there are only two states, it kind of forces you to stop thinking about a long process and instead just ask yourself, which one am I, right now, today?